This is how I see the world. What's displayed behind me, normal peripheral vision on one side, and my reality since August 2018 on the other side. 50% peripheral vision loss measured weekly in vision therapy sessions where I do eye exercises to rebuild neural pathways that were damaged in that fall that you read about. Everything you see outside this narrow tunnel is invisible to me unless I work really hard to see it. Every page of this 50,000 word thesis was written seeing only what you see on one side of that image. Every podcast interview, every coaching session, every moment in that prison library accomplished while navigating a world where half the visual field simply doesn't exist. I share this visual evidence with you not for sympathy, but because it sets the very foundation for everything that follows. Sometimes it's what we can't see that forces us to learn how to see. For 30 years before the injury, I wore a different kind of mask in corporate boardrooms. It was the mask of the CEO who had all the answers. You see this? This was the mask of certainty. Thomas Dutta, the man who projected confidence, authority, absolute control. But behind the mask, I carried this voice I couldn't remember, cultural heritage that I'd lost, stories my father never shared before he walked away when I was just 12 years old. This mask would stride into boardrooms, projecting absolute certainty. I've reviewed the market conditions. I've analyzed the quarterly projections. I've identified the strategic imperatives that you know exactly. I know what this company needs to succeed. But underneath the performance, the real conversation was always happening in silence in my mind. The questions I couldn't voice, the cultural heritage I'd lost, the foundation that was trying to build on that had never been prepared. It's August 26, 2018, and I'm at the Vedder River Inn in Chilliwack, British Columbia. Chilliwack, not a cold slap, but a place in the beautiful British Columbia where I live, some 2 hours from my home. I'm exhausted. For the first half of 226 kilometers on my bicycle, I was raising funds for Cancer Reach in what was called the Ride to Conquer Cancer. It was up and down hills in the bright sun and the rain that day. It was an incredible day. Except what wasn't part of the plan was the evening in the hotel bathroom. I stepped into the bathtub. I lost a fall. I balanced, fell backwards, and cracked my head. I cracked it on the porcelain lip, scrambling my brain's vision center. That fall didn't just damage my peripheral vision, it shattered every mask that I'd been wearing. When your cognitive machine that defined your success suddenly becomes unreliable, when you can't walk straight or speak clearly, the performance, it becomes impossible to maintain. This image, this visual proof of limitation, became the foundation for the quiet revelation, unfolding identity in a complex world. When your body, history, and identity are the terrain that you're exploring, no methodological map will suffice. Autoethnography wasn't an academic choice for Tom. It was an absolute necessity. Today, I want to walk with you through these thesis journey, but not as examiners evaluating my work, but as fellow travelers, exploring what happens when traditional sight fails and deeper vision emerges. The evidence is right there behind me. This visual image represents the clinical data that was documented in my thesis and the appendices. I hope you saw it. Knowledge, wisdom, even basic visual processing requires external input and support systems, an adaptive strategy. We, we need each other. And it's what I couldn't see that taught me how to lead in all areas of my life. And through critiquing my public works, my books, my podcasting collection, a TED Talk, executive coaching programs, and deeply personal prison ministry. Each of those became a mirror reflecting both performance and transformation. And from this practice, it wasn't theory, it emerged the LEADS framework. LEADS, listen, empathize, accept with unconditional positive regard, dare to be my authentic self, peek out from behind that mask, and share sequentially, share with reciprocity. The heart of my revelation, it challenges everything that I learned in leadership circles. All you need is within you now, Tommy, is not only neurologically false, it's culturally harmful and it's incomplete. What we need is connection, ancestral, embodied, external. And so I invite you to walk with me through these revelations. The journey from a corner office where I wore masks of certainty to a prison library where I learned authentic vulnerability, and to the rain soaked trails where everything I believed was shattered and reformed. And before I continue, I want to acknowledge and thank you all for being here today. Dr. Kirikow, Dr. Adams as our chair, Professor Koka Stefaniak, Rhino Gevers, and Dr. McGuire listening in the shadows. I appreciate the time, care, and attention that you all bring to this process. Now, I've chosen to present this without slides, and I'm simply telling stories in my own way. So you can see not just the thesis itself, but Tom, the man behind it, who lived the inquiry that shaped it. I'll move through 3 parts, and then I'm going to close by looking forward with one image. Transition 2/3 the way through to that image. Part 1, seeing confinement. I start the story in the most unlikely place behind steel doors that slam shut with the finality of a vault ceiling. The Surrey Pretrial Center, maximum security prison. It's massive, the building. I'm walking past guards where watchful eyes are everywhere in the sky and in the ceilings, and I can't see them. And I'm carrying children's books and an audio recorder for the parental reading program. As I go down the steel halls after being searched and approach the library through the little window on the steel door, we walk in. It smells like industrial cleaner. It's mixed with paper. And then there's something else I smell. Broken dreams. I sit across from Ethan, 23-year-old father to 5-month-old Emily Rose Miller, a daughter he'd never met outside these walls. His hands, they start to tremble and shake as he opens the very hungry caterpillar book. And he reads with a tenderness that breaks something open in my chest. His voice was soft, careful. He poured everything he can't give her into words that will travel from this place of punishment to wherever she sleeps tonight. When we finish, he stands up slowly. We walk to that door and he looks through the window. He points down the corridor towards his cell block. Way down there, he whispers. It's a long walk, the walk of shame. And I look at this father, Ethan, for a minute, and I see myself at 12 years old watching my own father leaving me. And then something shifted inside me. Something shifted my understanding. I looked at Ethan. I said, no shame, man. If I were you, Ethan, I'd be walking down that hall with pride because you just gave Emily Rose Miller something precious, her dad's voice, her dad's love, and she's going to carry that forever. And his face, it changed. The mask of the criminal, it fell away, and I see this father underneath. And then something shifted in his posture in a way. His shoulders were different. For the first time since I've known him, Ethan stands a little bit taller. And in that moment, watching a young father discover his own worth through the simple act of reading to his daughter, I'm learning something I never understood in 30 years of being in a corporate boardroom. And that authentic connection happens when we stop performing our expertise and start modeling the vulnerability we're asking of others. But here's what I couldn't see then, what became clear only through this doctoral reflection. I was unconsciously practicing what Pacific Islanders call talanoa, inclusive, participatory dialogue that creates wisdom through connection. My father, before he left us, used to host these kava ceremonies in our home in the Polynesian room. I wish you'd be there. Neighbors, if you can picture, sitting in a circle on the floor, sharing stories, sharing and talking, talk. My daddy used to make the traditional drink of Fiji, the kava, in a big wooden bowl. He'd mix it up, kind of look like dishwater, and then each person would drink from a smaller cup and pass it around that circle. Man, the seeds were always there waiting for me to remember. And in that prison library, I wasn't just facilitating a reading program, I was discovering the Leeds framework that would transform my understanding of leadership. But it wasn't from textbooks. It was from the sacred space between this young father, Ethan, and his unseen daughter. The Leeds framework had crystallized from these lived experiences. I listened deeply to Ethan, and he was teaching me something beyond the words people speak to the stories they're trying to tell. I accepted him as he was. The acceptance came from the rain-soaked revelation that wisdom I need existed beyond my own experience, and maybe it's in Ethan. I dared to be myself. I took off that mask, and I wasn't performative. I didn't have a title. I just chose presence, being there over performance. This work, it forced me to see what compassion looks like when it's stripped of its pretense and where it needs to live, but it often doesn't. Like in boardrooms where leaders, they perform strength instead of modeling vulnerability. Or in coaching programs one-to-one that promise transformation while avoiding the messy reality of human limitation. You see, it's what I couldn't see in those environments that taught me how to truly lead. And the prison became my laboratory for discovering that authentic connection requires us to seek beyond ourselves, to acknowledge our fundamental interdependence with one another. Part 2, Seeing the Child. It's March 21st, 2025, and I'm walking these familiar forest trails during an atmospheric river. 50 millimeters of rain are pounding the Pacific Northwest, pounding Port Moody, British Columbia, right outside my door. I'm on the trail, and 5 minutes in, I stop dead in my tracks, and an epiphany hits me with such a force I can barely breathe. I have this single thought that sticks in my mind. What if everything I've built my life on was wrong? 3 weeks earlier, this document arrived. An ancestral report I'd waited months for. I paid $800 to receive it. Information about my paternal great grandfather that my father never shared with me. It died in silence with him. As I run my fingers across the faded ink, tracing a 17-year-old boy's signature on an indentured contract, Writing seemed shaky, captured a moment, then everything familiar was being left behind for him. Bhagwan Ram. Bhagwan Ram, my great grandfather, had no way of knowing as he signed his name in Kolkata in a shipping office that he was writing the first chapter of our family's survival story in a world that would try to break him. Bhagwan Ram. I see the 17-year-old boy was torn from India and put on a ship and sent to Fiji to work on the plantations under the Gurmit system of indentured labor. But this teenager, he doesn't just survive systemic oppression, he transforms it. He becomes Lali Miraj, a candy seller who supported 20 families from his little store in Fiji. He turns bondage into generosity. He turns trauma into generational care. And standing in the rain, I realized that this wasn't within me, this knowledge I didn't have. Yes, I had to seek for it. I had to pay for it. I had to pursue it across continents and decades in my life. But once I found it, everything changed. How I saw my family patterns, my struggles with my own identity, the resilience that carried us through generations of displacement. When I was 12 years old, I watched my dad take his green duffel bag and load it into the Ford F-350 pickup truck. And at that moment in time, something broke. Not just our family, but the transmission of knowledge that should have passed from father to son, the stories of resilience, the cultural wisdom, the deep understanding that I belong to something larger than my confusion and pain that I'd carried in my head all my life. And by the way, everything back then was green. Took me a while to figure out. Dad was in the army. Well, everything but the green eggs and spam. Eggs and spam, Dad's favorite dish that he used to teach us to cook. The child in me spent decades searching for what was missing. Through every CEO position, through every book that I wrote, every coaching program I created, I was always seeking the foundation that was never laid. And it's what I couldn't see about my own inheritance that shaped every mask I'd later wear. And standing in the rain, and that day it was lightning, I remember, the forest around me illuminated. I realized again, the knowledge wasn't in me. I had to seek it, I had to pay for it, pursue it across continents for decades. And yes, once I found it, everything changed. Leadership, like sight, isn't what we're born with. It's what we learn to expand over time. But the seeking it continues. And just week after submitting this thesis, my wife Anna and I took a week away for our first real break in years. Our first break since COVID-19. Our first break since my brain injury. And we went up to a place called Osoyoos, British Columbia, 4 hours to the northern part of our province, our beautiful province. A desert oasis with one of the warmest lakes you'll find. Beautiful, spectacular mountains surrounding it. Anna's passionate about horses. So when we got up there, she went horseback riding in that resort. And I used to go with her. The old me would have joined her like a dirty shirt, as they say. No hesitation, carefree, bold. Let's go. But now, fear. Fear holds me back. Fear of another fall, another injury. I've already had my second concussion since all this began. Maybe another loss. So while she rode, I walked alone up a hill to what's called the Indigenous Heritage Site, a place where the local Indigenous people shared their stories and traditional pathways throughout the walk in the desert. I never forget, my eyes were straining. It was dry in the hot sun. It was over 100 degrees that day. And so I did something I'd never done before. I closed my eyes and I walked the heritage trails using only my other senses. So I ask you now, Would you please join me for 15 seconds or so and close your eyes? Walking through the desert, feet scraping against the dirt, can taste that bitter dirt dry in mouth. Sagebrush wisping by. Wind carrying scents like lavender and sagebrush. And sounds of empty life in empty distances. A bird, a rattle. Is that a rattlesnake? Please open your eyes. What I couldn't see with my damaged vision, I began to experience through touch, through hearing, and through being present. You see the image now on the screen. That image, that contrast was brought to my attention in a Zoom with Professor Kate, and she helped me understand something I'd never seen before. On one side, my familiar forest trails where I walk for reflection back home, where my senses are refreshed and restored. And on the other side, the desert heritage path, where my senses became alert in unfamiliar territory, where closing my eyes opened an entirely different way of knowing. Part 3, seeing differently. My limitation seeing the world with 50% peripheral vision became revelation. In fact, seeing beyond myself for support from others, it became vital to my success and survival. In my therapy chair, I remember sitting in my therapy chair processing a newly diagnosed complex PTSD. And the final piece clicked into place like a tumbler in a lock. Click. The masks I wore weren't just professional personas, they were neurological adaptations to missing information. When crucial knowledge is absent, our brains create survival strategies that limit integration of knowledge. This thesis combines something specific to our understanding of leadership development. Authentic transformation requires external seeking, relational practice, and acknowledgement of our fundamental independence between each other. That interdependence, the LEADS framework, it creates neurobiological pathways towards integration, building psychological safety where masks can be consciously chosen rather than unconsciously worn. But here's what I offer that's so different. A way of seeing leadership that includes what we've left outside that frame. It's what we can't see in traditional leadership models that this work brings into focus. But my visions therapy, it continues weekly. Every Thursday afternoon, I sit in a small room, much like the space I'm in now, putting on 3D glasses, tracking moving dots across the screen. My therapist, she's right beside me, her voice, her young voice. She says, Tom, relax the muscles around your eyes to soften their focus and allow your peripheral awareness to expand naturally. The irony is not lost on me. The irony that learning to see more by trying less, expanding vision by releasing control. I'm building not just damaged sight, but I'm expanding my perception itself. I'm learning to see in both familiar and unfamiliar territories, the forest trails where senses are refreshed, and the desert pathways where closing my eyes opened up an entirely new way of knowing. The final reflection, what I carry forward. Before I close, I want to briefly name the thread that runs throughout everything you've just heard and my thesis. What I've been exploring across this doctorate is how identity forms in public work when performance is no longer enough. I began by naming how I know what I know. Then I tested that knowing in places where presence matters more than language. And along the way, I examined how context shapes us, how masks help us function, and what happens when those masks, they soften. What I've learned is simple but Not easy for me. Just like sitting here now is not easy for me. We don't become ourselves alone. And leadership, those leaders that forget that will lose something that's essential. I no longer believe leadership development is something we do alone. Mm-mm. This doctorate has made that impossible for me to believe any longer. Real change doesn't come from insight held privately. It comes from meaning made between people, between each other, between stories, between generations, between what we know and what we have not yet been able to name. I also now understand trauma very differently. Oh boy, do I ever with all the therapies over the years. But not as something psychological, as something to do with missing knowledge and stories that were never passed down, wisdom that was interrupted, an understanding that should have been shared but wasn't. Much of my earlier success, I realized, was built on adaptation to that absence. The masks I wore were not flaws. Even though I was flawed, yes, they were survival strategies. And this work has helped me see that so clearly and to stop confusing performance with being present. So as a result, I now lead differently. I no longer lead by just giving all the answers. I lead by holding a space where people can tell their stories in order, where they don't have to rush or sound smart, where insight can arrive slowly, where something new can form between us in that space. That shift is not theoretical for me. It's already shaping how I write, how I speak, how I teach, and how I design the work that I take back into the world. What emerged through this research now lives in the Leeds framework, not as a model to sell, though, but as a discipline that I practice every day. I listen deeply. I meet others with empathy, creating safety through accepting them and having the courage to be real, to peek out behind my own mask, and then sharing only when the meaning is ready to be carried. There is one final learning I want to name. And through this journey, now I understand who Tom is. I understand what I'm here to do, but not as a job title, not as a destination, but as an orientation. And most importantly, I now trust that the most important knowledge often lives in what is quiet, relational, and unseen at first. From the quiet warrior to the quiet revelation. Let that land. As I come to the end of this presentation, I want to acknowledge that this work is not finished. It's alive and it's already in motion. And what I take forward from this doctorate is not a set of conclusions, but a way of seeing and a way of being with others. I didn't have access to that before. So thank you for holding a space for me and with me. And I welcome your questions and all the conversations that follow. One thing's for sure, I won't be perfect, but that's the best part of Tom, the perfect imperfections. Mr. Chair, thank you.